Hello friends, today we are here with the Sigma 14 to 24mm f2.8 lens. This is a brand new wide-angle lens available for Sony E-mount and L-mount mirrorless cameras, and today we're going to talk about why you should or should not buy this lens. Now, if you've been following Sigma for a while, they've been releasing quite a few E-mount lenses for Sony, which is really great for those of us who shoot Sony and don't want to pay Sony prices for some of their lenses. One of the things that's interesting about this lens is that it is the widest and fastest zoom lens out there for Sony E-mount cameras. Sony themselves do not make this particular focal range. They make a 12 to 24 f4 lens, but that is a little bit slower than this lens. So if you need an f2.8, this is the widest zoom lens available. So one of the first things you'll notice when you unbox this lens is that, like most Sigma lenses, it comes with a really great zippered case that is also very padded. And that is very needed because this lens, although it does have some wear the ceiling on it, it has a big flaw potentially in that the front of its lens is curved out, which means there's no way to really protect this lens. This is the way that the glass comes, and unlike other lenses, you cannot use your standard screw-on filters. So you have to be really careful to not damage this lens. So if you do buy this lens, which I think is about $1,300, you should definitely buy some insurance for it because it is really easy to damage. But with that said, this is actually a really solid lens, feels really good in the hands, and is, I think there's some plastic and maybe some rubber. It feels like there's a lot of metal involved in the construction. It also has some weatherproofing, and even the front of the lens has some coating to resist water and oil from fingerprints getting on it. There's also front and end caps. The end cap is here. The front cap obviously is a little bit bigger than you'd expect, but it does sit and locks into place up front. And in terms of using this lens, it's pretty straightforward. This is an autofocus lens, thankfully, but there is a pretty easy way to go over to manual focus. There is a switch right here, and you just toggle it to the side if you want to go into manual focus. And there's also an AFL button here to hold focus, and that's really all there is to it. But one other thing about this lens that's pretty unique is that because you can't put filters on the front of the lens, there's actually a rear filter holder here. And I think this is a relatively new move for Sigma lenses, but the only problem with it is that you'll have to invest in the particular filters that can fit the back of this lens here. Another thing you might notice about this lens is that it is pretty big. So this is, for reference, this is the Canon 24 to 70 f2.8 lens. Canon feels a little bit heavier, but these are both really hefty and really big lenses. And that's just something that you get by having an f2.8 aperture on your lens, because for reference, this is the Canon 24 to 70 f2.8. This is the Sony 24 to 70 f4. And even though these are different brands, the principle is still the same in that if you have an f2.8 lens, it's just going to be bigger and heavier than something like the f4 equivalent. So if you don't need f2.8, then you definitely might want to look into getting like a slower lens like an f4, because you'll save on it in terms of not only money but also size. The other lens I have here is the 16 to 35 f2.8, and so this has been a really common wide-angle lens for a lot of people that use wide-angle lenses. I myself have had this 16 to 35 in Canon for almost 10 years now, and this is the original, Mark I version. And if you take really good care of your lenses will last a really long time. The 16 to 35 focal range is one that a lot of people prefer just because you don't get distortion even at 16 millimeters typically. But with a wide angle lens such as this 14 millimeter, it's almost guaranteed that you're going to get some barrel distortion. So that is something that you do see when you're shooting at the widest focal range available for this lens. You'll see some distortion in that if you have vertical lines, they're not going to be purely vertical, they're going to be slanted a bit, and that's because this lens is doing everything it can to fit as much of the picture in front of it into the frame. And so by doing that, you either just have to get used to the fact that you'll have some distortion or just spend some time in post-processing. There's a lot of photo editing programs such as Adobe Photoshop that have some really great perspective control, so you can straighten those lines in post-production, but that's just an extra step that you'll have to take if you shoot with this lens and need to use it at its widest focal range. So let's go ahead and put this lens on the Sony A7R III, and I've been shooting with this lens for a couple weeks now. It is really big, really bulky. It's It's a little front heavy, but it's not terrible to work with. So why might you want a lens like this? Well, there's a few main reasons why people like to use these wide-angle lenses, and probably the most popular are real estate and architecture. When you're in a hotel room or an apartment or even a house, you always have that challenge of having a space that's really narrow, but yet you need to be able to capture it in one single shot, ideally. And so in those cases, you always want a wide-angle lens. And so the 16-35mm lens is the other one that I use predominantly with my Canon lens, or with my Canon camera. But the 14-24 offers you an even bigger perspective, which is good and bad. So we'll show you some of the good and some of the bad of using this lens. In the corner, so whenever I shoot a room, I usually try to go front and center and then take each corner just to get different angles. So we'll go ahead and do that from this perspective. And yeah, we have enough lighting in here that we don't need a tripod necessarily, but if you're taking like a high quality or something professional, then you definitely want a tripod to make sure that you can get to, you know, at least f11 to make sure that everything is in focus that you want it to be. So if you shoot interiors or have any aspirations to do so, then this might be a great lens for you. Another reason why people like to use wide-angle lenses like this is for landscapes. And for landscapes, barrel distortion is less of an issue because you don't really have vertical lines in nature or in landscapes. So this might be a really great landscape lens for you. But one of the challenges is that you can't use your standard filters, because when you're shooting landscapes, you usually have to control the natural lighting, and you do so by using your ND filters or your polarizers. And you know, your traditional polarizers and filters are circular and they screw into the front of the lens. And so if you've invested in any system like that, that is not going to work. But the final reason why you might want to get a wide-angle lens like this is astrophotography. And that is actually the main reason why Sigma made this lens, or at least that's what they're saying in their marketing materials, is that this is meant to be a really great astrophotography lens for stars, for the Milky Way, for anything celestial. And unfortunately, this is not the time of year to go out and do astrophotography. So I was not able to test that aspect of this lens. But from what I'm reading about it, it really is meant to shoot the night sky. And one other use that you might find for this lens is portraiture. So 14-24 isn't really a popular focal range for portraiture, but if you do like to shoot on the wider side, some people do use 24mm and get, you know, really stunning wide-angle portraits of people, then this might actually be a really great lens because of that f2.8 aperture. You can get some really nice bokeh. And one other thing to note about the Sigma lens is that it is not image stabilized, so there's no vibration reduction or IS, and so if you intend to shoot handheld with it or shoot video with it, this may not be the best lens unless your camera body has really good IBIS or in-body stabilization to stabilize your shot. So would I buy this lens? I actually had the Nikon version of this lens. I had it for a long time, and it's a really great focal length, but again, it's just really specialized because of all that barrel distortion. I actually find that 16mm is a better focal range for the type of work that I like to do, and it's a lot easier to fix the distortion that you might see in the 16mm range than it is on a 14mm range. So for me personally, because I already have a Canon 16-35 lens, and this is my excuse for pretty much every new lens, is that I just stick with this lens. I can't fail with this lens. This has just been the best wide-angle lens for me. I don't have a current need to replace this lens, but if I ever did, this is definitely a lens that I would consider, because 14mm is just a really great wide range that you cannot often get. It is currently about $1,400 US, which is not a terrible price for an f2.8 lens, especially one of this focal range. Because again, the only other option if you want a wide angle E-mount lens is a 12-24, which, you know, might be a little bit wider, but you're sacrificing a few f-stops, and that is that it's only an f4 lens. So with that in mind, I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Would you buy this lens? And if so, what would you use it for? Let me know in the comments below. Show me some sample images if you've used this lens on either the Sony E-mount version or any other cameras out there. Let me know, I'd love to hear from you. And thanks for watching, and we will see you in the next video.